Good afternoon, and welcome to the Boise Metro Chamber's Metro Minute series, your quick guide to business impact. I'm Tori Thomas, Community and Government Affairs Manager here at the Chamber, and your host for today's event. The Chamber is Idaho's only five-star accredited chamber, representing nearly 2,000 members. Our events and educational content are only possible thanks to our members' investment into our community. Joining us today on today's episode is Senator Janie Ward-Engelking from District 18. Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to do a quick bio, and then we'll jump into a few questions. Senator Janie Ward-Engelking is a native Idahoan who grew up on a farm near Marsing and has been a resident of District 18 for 36 years. She is a graduate of Valley View High School and holds degrees from Whittier College, Idaho State University, and Boise State University. A former classroom teacher of 33 years, she went on to serve as both an Idaho State representative and now a Idaho State Senator since 2014. She currently serves on the Commerce and Human Resources, Education, and Finance committees in the legislature and is a proud mother of 5 and grandmother of 9. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you for serving our state. We really appreciate the work that you continue to do.
Thank you. My pleasure. It's an honor.
Well, the first question I have, obviously, we just had a legislative session, just got out. We were talking just a little bit before about how obviously busy that is, and then just kind of jumping right back into things. Kind of looking back on that recent session, which outcomes do you believe had the greatest impact on Idaho's overall business community, particularly within employers in the Treasure Valley?
Well, I think we're going to have to talk about the budget because I think it's going to impact every business in Treasure Valley and in Idaho. We did conform to the President Trump's big, beautiful bill, and we were expecting to do that, but we did the retroactive conformity, which took us back to 2025, which further reduced our revenue. And we were already in a self-induced revenue crisis. So I think what moved forward were tremendous budget cuts, and in every single department, every single agency, of course, to education, higher education, career technical, roads and bridges, launch program. And, when you cut agencies, you also are cutting employees, you're cutting permitters, which then impact businesses on how quickly we can get those permits issued. So there was a lot of, I wish I could say there was more positive, but I think there was a lot of negative impact on the businesses here in Treasure Valley that will be pretty long-term because the cuts we made were 5% across the board, ongoing, permanent. So we added a few things back in, which I was thankful for, but not enough.
Yes, I think the budget was obviously such a tricky and such a central focus of this session for all of you. Obviously, you all work so tirelessly on trying to figure out what will still put our state in a good position. And, obviously acknowledging that those cuts are really hard to make, especially when it so directly involves our workforce and our quality of life and, just everything that people love about Idaho.
Absolutely.
Jumping into, you mentioned Idaho Launch taking a bit of a reduction. How do you see that program still continuing on in the future and hopefully, addressing employer needs?
Well, we have some pretty great data right now from the launch program. We know that more students that graduated from Idaho high schools are going on. They're getting an advanced certificate or an advanced degree, and that is very positive for everybody. And because it's in demand careers, and we have a waiting list for students that want to get those grants so that they can pursue an advanced degree of some kind. And so it did take a hit, took a $20 million hit. maybe temporary, but there was some intent language in the bill that says if any of that money is turned back or clawed back because a student didn't finish a program, that money would then, instead of going back into the launch program, would go to the general fund. So we may see some additional cuts, but I'm hoping not, because we don't have a lot of data. We only have 2 years worth of data, but it's very positive. We know it's making a difference to students. We know that they can leave those programs and get a really good paying job here in our communities and be able to stay in Idaho. So that's very positive.
Yes, the chamber has been such a big supporter of the Idaho launch program. I think it's really cool that so many Idaho kids have the opportunity to stay in Idaho and then also even just have the opportunity to consider going on. I think there's so many missing opportunities of kids that are, just not thinking it's an option. And I think this opens up so many doors. So we're grateful for the support that it has, and we're hopeful that it'll continue on as a good program for our next generation.
A lot of those students are first time students going to college and their families. So we know it's making a difference. We don't have as much data as I'd like, but I'm hoping that we'll continue the program and see great opportunities for our students.
You're right. I think the data, we've already seen some, and it's been really amazing. The Idaho Workforce Development Council just really does a really great job with that. But it'll be really cool to continue seeing that data come out and just continue to see our businesses thrive through this program. Right. Well, more on kind of a positive note, obviously there were a lot of downsides to this session, like we were just kind of talking about, but kind of within, Idaho's long-term workforce and talent pipeline, what do you think was the most significant policy decisions this session that, would help strengthen the workforce?
Tori, I really racked my brain on this, and I wish I could be more positive. But really what I saw very few positive bills that went through that's going to be positive for businesses and education in Idaho. And I didn't see any expansion of that pipeline. In fact, we have legislators that would like to see the launch program shut down. They think that we don't need to fund our universities or colleges, that public schools could be privatized. So we've got a heavy lift over there. And what I saw was this year, I think we'll have long-term negative consequences. We saw tremendous cuts to higher education, 25 million, 4.4 million in career technical education, 2 million for community colleges, 50 million for K-12, and roads and bridges were cut by 300 million. We saw every single agency take a hit. We saw reduction in force and layoffs. So no money for state employees, even though we know that that the cost of living has gone up dramatically. No raises for educators or administrators. So I was trying to find some really good news, and I guess the good news is we kept the launch program. We were able to add some money back in one time for roads and bridges, some money back in for career technical and for community colleges. So we were able to do some one-time fixes and also fund our public safety, our state police. We were able to basically do bake sales and found a little bit of money here and there to bridge the gap. And I think one of the positive things, we still have a growing economy. So that means we may be able to grow ourselves out of this if we don't implode in the interim. I'm not sure.
Well, I really appreciate your honesty and just, being realistic about this session. I think it was a really hard one. And then I appreciate the hope at the end too. I think there is, like you said, there's a growing economy. And if we can figure out how to grow with it and thrive with it, then I think Idaho is in a really great position. But I think it's a tricky session. I think it was a hard one for a lot of people.
It was brutal, and I think, I always have hope. I'm not, we'll battle our way out of this, but I'm not sure how quickly we'll right the ship, but we will battle our way out of this.
Well, and that's why we're grateful for legislators like you and so many others that are willing to do that hard work, because the older I get, the hard work just, it's not very fun.
Well, and the really good news is we have over $1.7 billion in funds that are in our stabilization accounts, or rainy day funds, some people call them, but we have them sitting there. They can be used. We didn't touch them this year, but we took some interest off the accounts, but we didn't dip into those. So we have a backup if we need it. And so I'm not totally frustrated at this point, but I want to see us start making better decisions, because when you cut roads and bridges, the money for that, you cut good paying jobs in our local communities. And when we cut higher education, that means our students are in line. They're on waiting lists for engineering positions, engineering classes. And that means Micron has to hire engineers from out of state, or we have the nursing programs in all of our colleges and universities have a waiting list. That means we're hiring traveling nurses for the VA hospital and other hospitals at 3 times the cost. So I'm hoping that some of the legislators will start to see the connection between investing in infrastructure and education, and how that benefits not only businesses, but the economy of Idaho.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's truly kind of beautiful in a lot of ways, and also really hard when you consider, though, that everything is connected in the city and in a successful state. It's, if you want a good workforce, you need housing and you need good transportation, and it just so many opportunities within that. And if you can make that connection and you can find those people that are willing in different industries to participate, it's pretty incredible what we all can do when we can come together and get that work done.
And I have seen more collaboration, I think, between universities, colleges, and businesses, and also between the cities and counties and businesses. And we saw some positive housing bills come through this year that I think will be helpful. They're not in place yet, so we don't know exactly what the impact will be, but smaller lot sizes I think will be beneficial. And so I think those things are positive. I also am seeing more private-public partnerships that I think will pay big dividends down the road. So we are seeing some positive things. I just and the fact that we're still growing, and that this is a state that everybody loves, and so far we've been able to keep our public lands open, so that's positive. So there were some positive things, just not a lot in the business arena per se.
Yeah. Well, jumping in, kind of going back to education, obviously, you were a teacher for so many years, which thank you for your service in the classroom. And then also as a senator, what's your perspective on how the state's, approaching alignment between education outcomes in K through 12, post-secondary, and then workforce training, and then obviously the evolving needs of Idaho employers? Obviously, we kind of talked a little bit about education taking a cut, and so this is kind of a tricky question, but from your perspective, it would be nice to hear.
Well, I think our State Department of Education, which is K-12, and our State Board of Education, which is K-12 and higher education, is doing a really good job of aligning things and streamlining things. We've got a lot of upheaval with the U.S. Department of Education, and so there's a lot of unknowns there. But I think the education community, local school districts, and the State Department and the State Board are working very well together, along with businesses. Like I said, some more collaboration, I think, from the business community with what they need to see from colleges and universities, and also outcomes from K-12. The problem is we have a group of legislators that really would like to not fund universities or colleges. They think it can all be done by private industry, and they would like to see the privatization of K-12. So with that mindset, it's very difficult to get any additional funds. We're last in the nation in per pupil expenditures again for K-12. We made some headway, and now we've gone backwards again. So it's a heavy lift over there. But I'm hopeful that as we move forward, this is an election year. Maybe we'll see some changes that will mean a brighter future for education in Idaho, because it is an investment that matters not only to our children and grandchildren, but businesses and the economy of Idaho. It is it's part of the engine we need to keep the economic development growing here in Treasure Valley.
Yes, and the collaboration that you mentioned, I think, is really helpful. It's cool to see that there's so many different ways that people are trying to collaborate and trying to figure out, because you're right, it does impact families and kids, but it also impacts the future of our state and so many of our businesses. And it's been really cool for the chamber to be trying to get involved, be in these conversations, and just trying to see how we can fit to help support the business community.
Well, and I've loved the fact that we're seeing some daycares and some child centers being put right in businesses, which is going to be very helpful for our workforce. And we're seeing a little bit more work being done in pre-K, which will be beneficial, I think, for businesses. And we're really we're seeing a little bit of headway with special education. We passed one bill that will help school districts meet the needs of special education students that have incredible health issues. And so they'll be able to apply for a grant to the State Department of Education. So we're seeing a little bit of headway, just it's a slow go right now.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, I mean, this whole conversation has been kind of, growth and
yeah,
trying to make sure people are supporting the needs of Idaho. And then obviously the budget kind of ties back into that as well. So where do you see, how do you see the longer term impacts of these cuts? I mean, I think we've talked about it a little bit but for, the state's capacity and then financial stability.
Well, I think we're going to have to figure out a way, whether it's dipping into our rainy day funds, and maybe we'll have enough growth that we won't need to do that, but we're going to have to find a way to fund our universities to make sure those in-demand careers are being funded, that they can build out those programs. We're going to have to provide funding for K-12. They took a pretty significant hit this year, not only in support units, which is the money we send out per classroom, but a $9 million cut in healthcare, an additional $9 million, and $7.5 million cut in transportation when fuel prices are going through the roof. So those things are going to have to be addressed. But whether we do that through growth, there's lots of options. We could suspend some of our revenue reduction bills. We could suspend those for a year. We could certainly suspend paying for private schools for a year. That would give us $50 million. We could look at dipping into some of the rainy day funds. So we have options. We need to have the political will to do it, to look at everything, to put everything on the table and say what's critical for families, what's critical for businesses, and what's critical for the growth of Idaho in the future. And those are the things we address first.
I love that. Thank you for that. Well, kind of to close out today, what do you think is one takeaway from the session that you think the business community should feel optimistic about going forward?
I think, we know that we've done quite a few revenue cuts. In fact, we've done over $4 billion in 5 years. So I think it's time now to say, okay, enough of that. We got to look at what we have to invest in. I think that we were able to add a little bit of money back for roads and bridges and a little bit of money back for career technical. I'm hoping to see more done in the future in those areas. But I think one takeaway is we are still a growing state. We are still one of the fastest growing states in the nation. It's a beautiful place to live. Idaho is a place that people want to stay and make their homes here. And I guess the other positive thing is an election year. We can change some of the faces in the legislature that have been not willing to look at anything except cuts. They want to right size the budget, and I don't know what that means, because in reality, we've seen, if you take into consideration growth and cost of living, we have almost a flat budget for the last 10 years, less than a 2% increase. So it's been, we've right-sized government. It is where it needs to be. In fact, if anything, we need to look at some areas where we have to invest, because we know mass transit, one thing, we need to know that mass transit is essential in the Treasure Valley, and maybe a local option tax on the horizon. I don't know. We'll see. But there's room for optimism for sure.
Yeah, I love that. I think, yeah, there's so many opportunities, so many options. It's definitely not just a doom and gloom situation. Obviously, like you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of hard work to be done, but we have a lot of people willing to do that, whether it's the legislature or local governments, or it's the business community, the private sector, childcare. It's so many people are willing to work together and collaborate. And I think you're right. I think we are just wanting to make sure Idaho remains the Idaho that we all have known it to be and love it to be, and making sure our quality of life is really high, and making sure people want to stay here. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to that. So,
and I think the business community has really stepped up in those areas, and come to the table to see, looking at options and how do we solve the housing crisis. And so we're seeing a lot of collaboration, and that's very positive.
Great. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that you say that. I think it's hard. I think a lot of people are unaware at how accessible you legislators are. It's really cool to have so much access to all of you and the Capitol, and to know that so many of you are willing to take phone calls and have people join you at committees. And it's something that I am trying to figure out how to get that out. And it seems like the business community is really excited about those opportunities of
Good.
How do we get involved? How do we chat with them and make sure that they know where we're coming from? Because how do you guys know what laws to enforce and to create when you haven't heard from people? So it's really cool to see that continued collaboration.
Absolutely. We count on you as being the experts in some of these fields, and we want to hear from you. So that's really important. Thank you.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for your time today and for your service to our state. We really appreciate you. Thank you to all of our listeners. We really appreciate you as well. Thank you to our media partners, Idaho Ed News, Idaho Capital Sun, and Idaho Press. We'll see you guys on the next Metro Minute.
Thank you.